Good morning, everyone. Hi, it is Stacy. This is Walking in My Shoes. We are loving my veteran this morning. Hey, we are going to talk about part of a series all week because I'm going to do series. I love these. Um, when the military world and the civilian world collide, I think it is something that we need to address, and it needs to be looked at from both sides because our actions from one to the other really do affect the other. We're not military. We were not necessarily the military in the military. And so we don't have that mindset and we don't have that way of thinking and we don't understand some of the stuff. Good morning, Kathy. And they don't understand our world because they see it from the military world. And some things that they learned in the military, they carry into their daily lives because they weren't unprogrammed. And so we have to deal with that ramification, and it can make it very difficult. So I'm going to grab some coffee. Everybody grab your coffee, and we'll get started here. At a very young age, most of our veterans went into military service. And it is very clear, regardless of the branch of the service, they tell you that when you go to basic training, you are broken down and built back up the way they want you to be. We hear that all the time, where they're broken down and they're built back up the way they want you to be. We have a lot of things that change in this world, but some of the things that have never changed in this world for a very long time, going way back to even the Roman era, was rank in the military. There was a ranking system, a hierarchy, if you will. So you have your people at the bottom, and then they work their way and they become higher and higher and higher. And so you have this division of people that are based upon rank. And so you can have a guy who's enlisted, and he may have been in for 5 or 6 years and really gone up through his rank. And as an enlisted person, he or she is at a certain level. And then you get this brand new officer candidate who comes out of college and joins the military. And all of a sudden, this guy with no experience becomes a higher ranking official. But they learn to respect the position, not necessarily the person, but the position. And so there's this hierarchy and this way and their mentality of thinking. There's a way that you speak, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am. And there's a way that you speak to people that they understand. So this hierarchy kind of comes up in the ranks. And when they get out and they see that there's not these levels of respect, that especially if they've been in for a while and they've earned a certain rank, now all of a sudden they're in the civilian world and their rank doesn't matter. And that makes it very difficult. When you've worked hard to get to a certain level, and all of a sudden you get out and you're in the civilian world, everything you've worked for just doesn't matter anymore. Your rank doesn't matter anymore. And while a lot of them will say, well, my rank has nothing to do with it, in their mindset it does, because it's the way they're trained. It's the way of their thinking. It's not something that became unprogrammed. I know that we've said 1,000 times, I've heard it at least 1,000 times, they don't untrain them. Our military will say, we were not untrained. They got us to a certain level of thinking, and when we got out, they didn't untrain us or deprogram us, are the words they use a lot. And so their mentality of thinking is all gone. Everything they've thought about, where they were, what their rank was, what their position was, all of that, they don't know where they're at. They're floundering. And so that is a big deal when it comes to the military life colliding with the civilian world. And we don't always see that. We don't see that from that perspective a lot of times. And so it makes it difficult. There are a lot of times that our veterans say they feel like they have no value, they have no purpose, they don't know where they are, who they are. They don't know what their purpose is. In the military, they knew who they were. In the military, they knew who they were. They were defined by their MOS, right? What they did, and they were defined by their rank. They knew who they were. So they had very clear-cut objectives in who you are and what your title is and what your responsibilities are. They were defined. They were very clear. And it's been that way in military history forever. And you don't associate, like officers and enlisted don't always associate together. When you go onto a military base, there is an officers club and there's an enlisted club. So there was a division even then based upon a hierarchy. Officers club and enlisted club. I remember my grandfather telling me little stories, and I was young. So my mom talked about it later, especially when we started doing this, and she said she can remember having to live off base because my grandfather was an officer. And he loved his enlisted guys. Loved them. But they lived off base and would have like secret barbecues because in the military world, the lines were very clear that you didn't cross from enlisted to officer and vice versa. Even as a Navy wife, we had an enlisted wives club and we had an officers wives club. And those two worlds didn't collide with each other. They didn't intermingle with each other. And it was very difficult. And you think that was difficult? You should have been my poor ex-husband. Because I was friends with his CO and XO. I knew them and their family before he ever went in because of my dad's job. And I already knew these people. And I didn't think anything of associating with the XO and the CO and their family. And they didn't think much of associating with me. It was like, hey, you know, we've known her since she was a little girl. You know, we've all kind of known each other. So nobody thought anything of it, but it created a problem for him in his career because his bosses, the enlisted bosses, didn't like it. So you had very defined roles in the military. You knew what your job was. You knew where your place was. You knew. So now we've got these military training, military people. They have a defined role. They know where their place is. And now they're in the civilian world. So what happens when you get home? Who's in charge of the household? Who runs things? That's blurry. It's a partnership. We're equal. Like, nothing in my life is equal. So you've got these people who there's a very clear hierarchy, and there's like, but nothing is equal. You know, in our world, nothing was equal. And you're like, well, who's going to make the ultimate decision? Well, we'll come to a decision together. But if we can't, who makes the ultimate decision? If one day we're making the ultimate decision and the next day we're telling them to make the ultimate decision, where do you think that blurriness comes from in their mind? It comes from their training and their mindset. It comes from the way they see things. What do we need to get done today? Military is very clear and objective. You're going to do this. Doesn't matter if you're an officer or enlisted. You have a job and you know exactly what you're going to accomplish on that day or in that job or in that mode. What are we going to do today? I don't know. What do you want to do? So now it's not that you don't ask, we don't talk about what we want to do, but what happens is that it becomes this grayness that they're not used to. This gray area that they're not used to. And while it is normal in the civilian world to have this stuff, it is not normal in their world. It is a mindset that was literally trained into them that allowed them to become better at their job. It's a thing called accountability. They learned accountability. And they were accountable based upon rank and job. And there was a very clear accountability factor. If somebody screwed up, you knew who screwed up because you followed this chain. And it was very clear. In our world, we don't have that. In our world, there isn't. Well, it just happened. In the military world, things just don't happen. And so when we're talking about getting our mindset changed, and we're talking about how do you change their mindset, right? When there's no accountability and we say, you've got to be responsible for your stuff, I've got to be responsible for mine, and in the real world, shit just happens, they don't get that shit just happens. Somebody's accountable for it. Somebody is accountable for it. If they don't get enough food, somebody was accountable for not getting the food there. Doesn't matter that whatever was bringing the food in, air, land, sea, however it was coming, doesn't matter that something happened to that mode of transportation. At the end of the day, somebody was accountable and they could follow that path. Well, now we're living in a world where there's not that accountability structure. They don't understand that accountability structure. It doesn't exist in our world. I mean, we have some accountability, but there's a lot of gray area. They don't deal with gray area. So the very things that they were trained and reprogrammed and broken down to rethink everything, and they were broken down again to rethink and reprogram their brain. When they get out, nobody teaches them that. You know, it's acceptable in the military. We've talked about this. It's acceptable in the military that when you're mad or you're angry at somebody, you can get in their face and cuss them out. Right? Like, you son of a bitch, what were you doing? What the heck were you thinking? Yeah, but if they talk to us that way, we may hear them speak to us that way. But if somebody else spoke to us that way, they're going to kill them. Not literally, but you know what I'm saying? It's not acceptable. So why do they think it's acceptable to us? Because it was acceptable in their mindset and in their training. It doesn't mean it's acceptable. This is where we're talking about these two worlds collide. And we have to find compromise and a new world. A world that takes parts of the military and the military mindset, and a world that takes part of the civilian world and the civilian mindset. And we have to find that compromise in this is how it works. This is how it does. You know, I find it, we even in our lives, and a lot of stuff is, I mean, what we talk about is our lives. So in our lives, if there's stuff that I kind of want done and it may not be urgent, maybe whatever, and we're talking about, you know, hey, at some point today, will you take care of this? Or I'm getting ready to run to the store, right? And it's my concept. Hey, we need to run up to the store. It may take him a few minutes. But if it is his idea and we're going to go to the store, he's like, well, I thought we were leaving. And like, he's dressed and halfway out the door. And I'm like, how is that different than when I say it and you're not dressed and halfway out the door? Because in his mind, he's still, it's instinctively that it's not that he's thinking about it intentionally, because he's not. But in his mind, it still clicks back into that. You're told to do something, do it, you do it now. And he doesn't get all this. But when I say it, because it's a different world, so it's almost like, hey, who's giving the orders? Who's giving the direction? If it's coming from them, it becomes like an order, like a military thing, because that's how they think. If it's coming from us, it's civilian, and they're like, whatever. And so we have to find that compromise. Where does that compromise fall? How do we redefine the two worlds to get us to a relationship and not the mindsets of our own world? And we have them. And so when these worlds collide, it makes it difficult. It's not always intentional. And people will say, they've been out for 20 years, they just need to get over it. And I look, and I've noticed this because I'm getting to where over time I've really started to notice lots of little things in the world. There's a certain way I tie my shoes, and there's a certain way he ties his shoes, and they're not the same way. I learned one way, he learned another. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the shoes are still tied. But if I had to go all of a sudden, he said, this is the way you need to tie your shoes, and I had to learn to do that, it would be difficult for me. It doesn't mean I can't do it, but it would be difficult for me to tie my shoes the way he does. And it would be difficult for him to tie his shoes the way I do. Why? Because it is something we've done forever that's instinctive. It's something we've done forever that's instinctive. I go back to when I broke my right collarbone. Y'all, that was the most horrible experience ever. Wasn't the pain, wasn't any of that. I am so right-hand dominant. I am so right-hand dominant that I can't even get toilet paper with my left hand. Right? So for me to have to think, oh, you can't use your right arm, it was hard because my entire life I am right-handed and I am very right-hand dominant. So it's just that you have to put it in these terms when you're thinking about it. Hey, it's what we instinctively have done. We don't think about it. We don't think about the way we learn to write. We don't think about the way we learn to tie our shoes. They don't think about the way that they took orders. They don't think about the way they fit in a hierarchy. It just happened. It just happened. We don't think about everything we say has to be in a military mindset. We don't think about that. We think about the fact it's just life. Most of us didn't grow up in that world. Most of us, even if you were married into that world, you still were not part of that world. Again, I remember the situation. We had a situation arise with my ex-husband and his pay and stuff, and I went and fought it. And I remember his boss calling him to his office and saying, look, you need to control your wife. She didn't come in your sea bag, buddy. We don't care about her. And I'm like, but hold on, our pay is really screwed up, and he was supposed to accept it and shut up. Well, what about us having groceries and feeding the kids and getting gas, right? I mean, that was important to us. But in his world, it was all, you don't do that. You don't cause this wave. Your wife cannot cause this wave. So that division and that mindset is so different, and it's second nature. And I remember him coming home and saying, well, we're just going to have to figure it out. And I'm like, oh, hell no, we're not. Let's just say I won. But it was uncomfortable for him, and he suffered ramifications for me standing up for us, because you don't question that in the military world. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm going to stand up for us. You just do in the military world because you're ordered. So it's very difficult when those two worlds mix, and how do we find that compromise in our lives? And a lot of us get this mindset, you've been out for a long time, you need to get over it by now. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Just because it's what we've always done. Do you have to think about standing up and walking across the room? Or is it instinctive for you? Do you have to think about standing up and going down and putting one foot in front of the other? You don't think, well, I need to get from the couch to the kitchen. So let me think about these steps. I have to stand up. I have to put one foot in front of the other. I have to move my right foot. Now I have to move my left foot. No, walking across the room is instinctive.
Does Andy shake it all around?
It's instinctive for us. It's instinctive for other people. So when things become trained, programmed, whatever word you want to use, when they become part of our mindset, it becomes instinctive. It becomes second nature. You're not going to tell me, good morning, Callie, you're not going to tell me to do something different. It doesn't mean I can't do it. It means it's going to take me a long time to do it. And I see that. I even relate that with my son. I've been a medic for 20 years. My son's now in the field. And so we'll talk about calls. And we'll talk about stuff on the ambulance. And we'll talk about this stuff. And he talks about what he does and how he does it. And I'm like, I don't know if I could do that. Why? Because 20 years ago, we did it this way, and this was instinctive, and this is how I carried it out for 20 years. In his mind and his world, his instincts are different based on the changes. It doesn't make one of our ways right and one of our ways wrong. It just makes them what they are. And I think about that. There's this stuff they now use if you got like what they call a sucking chest wound. It's like if you have a hole in your chest cavity. We used to use Vaseline gauze to close it up. Well, we learned quickly you just use the wrapper, throw the gauze away. It was worthless. They actually have chest seals. I'm like, how the hell do you put that on? Right? And so if I was on a truck and it had both, I'm going to reach for the darn Vaseline gauze. Why? Because I'm used to it. And that's why Vaseline gauze is still required on ambulances today when they have this other. Because it is something that some of us used all along, and we're just used to using it out of second nature. And so it just becomes that. And that's where we're at when we're trying to get these worlds together. Where's our common ground? How do we see things a little differently? It doesn't mean we have to change everything in our lives to adhere to the military mindset. And it doesn't mean, though, they have to give up everything in their training and their mindset to become part of the civilian mindset. Where's the compromise? That's what this is about. It's about finding common ground and a compromise you can both live with. But before you can find compromise in where you're both going to live with, you have to be able to see why they think the way they do, why they act the way they do. And then you can create a better compromise based on that. Based on that theory. They had no gray area. Gray was not a color for them.
Not in my wheelhouse.
It's not, Carl says it's not in his wheelhouse. It wasn't a color in their world. It was black or it was white. It was very clear. It was black or it was white. And, you know, it's interesting because I hear so many people talk about it. And even in the military world, when I lived as the active duty wife and even now, a lot of engines were like, I am not making my bed when I get out of the military, right? Because there was so much of it when they were in basic training. I am not making my bed because they wanted it made very specifically. I'm not making my bed. And it's funny because when we go to make the bed, he is very picky. Doesn't mean he makes it every day, okay, because I usually make the bed. But when he does it, he is very picky, especially when we're changing sheets, about how the corners are folded. Why? Because it's instinctive. Same way with packing a suitcase. Y'all, I fold my clothes and I lay them out a certain way. Nope. This mofo can roll up everything and it fits in something like the size of an overnight bag. We could go away for a month and it's going to fit in something in the overnight bag. Why? Because it's the way he's done it forever. It doesn't mean we're still not going on vacation. It doesn't mean the shit's still not getting in the suitcase.
No, it just means I can fit more stuff.
It just means I can fit more stuff. and even when we would go on trips, like we go to my mom's, yeah, I'm packing the suitcase like a week ahead of time, right? Like I got the suitcase laid out, and I'm like, we got to put this in here, and this in here, and this in here, and he ain't got a damn thing in there. I'm like, babe, you gonna pack this? And he says, no. I said, well, when are you gonna put your stuff in here? Right before we leave. I'm like, Carl, what the hell is up with that? It needs to be packed so it's ready, because that gave me a peace of mind, right? It had to be packed. It had to be ready ahead of time. You know what his theory was? Because they didn't know exactly what they had. It was ready. He had it right there. He didn't have it in there. I'm like, why? And he's like, because I don't know exactly what I need till I get ready to go. Military mindset. Military training.
Destinations change.
Destinations change on the last minute. How is he going to go through his head in his step-by-step process? Do I have this and do I have that? One day, y'all, it was bad. One day, we went to go get in the car and go somewhere, and I had grabbed, I don't remember if it was his keys or his wallet or his phone or something, and he's like all over the house. I'm like, what are you doing? Are we going or what? And he felt lost. He was like, I'm like, I've got your keys. And he's like, fine. And then we sat in the car for a minute, and he was going, you could see his mind. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, when you picked up my keys, you messed up my checkoff list in my head. I'm like, oh, okay. See, so we just don't understand it. I thought I was being nice by grabbing the keys because I had an extra hand. We do it with drinks, same way. If I grab his drink and put it in the car, he's like all in a spot. Even if I tell him, I've got your drink. Or I grab it and then he's looking for something. I'm like, honey, I've already got your drink. Then he's got to come back and walk the whole house to make sure. And this is like going to Walmart, y'all. Because his mind programs differently and we have to find that common ground. Now he just brings his own drink. Makes me happier. It's easy. And while we don't think about it, we all think about, oh, it's all the big stuff. It's all this stuff. It's all that stuff. It's the little stuff. You start paying attention to the little itty bitty stuff that is part of their world. Their little idiosyncrasies. The little things that set them off. Literally grabbing the keys and taking them to the car really did screw with his mind. Like, I think we were going to the doctor in Atlanta or something. And all the way to Atlanta, he's in this mind, and it's not like he's mad. He's just like really concentrating on something. Like, what is in your head? He says, I'm trying to think about what we left. And I said, we didn't leave anything. He said, yeah, but I'm not the one who checked everything off. When you grabbed the keys, and I was like, I never even thought that me grabbing the keys would put him in that set. It never even dawned on me. But it did. It messed up his checklist. It messed up his little list of things that he carries in his head. Why? Because it was second nature to him. It was second nature to make sure that we had this. Going back to the suitcase and the rolling up the stuff to go in the suitcase. Y'all, I'm taking the big old suitcase to my mama's. We got all this shit. And like my mama doesn't have a washer, right? But we're taking all this shit. And we'd be like, we're there for a week. And on about day 5, I'm like, hey, babe, I'm getting ready to throw in some laundry. Do you need some underwear? He said, no. You said we were going to be here for 7 days. This is day 5. I have 3 pair left. And I'm like, Clark, she's got a washer. You said 7 days. I have an extra pair left. And in his little overnight bag, somehow he managed up getting 8 pairs of drawers in there. But he knew. He knew how long we were going to be there. And he was planned and he was prepared. And that was his mindset. And we just don't see that. And so there's so much that goes on when our worlds collide. For most of us, the civilian side of us, especially a female woman side who's had kids, planning and preparing is important, and getting all of our stuff together is important. And we want to make sure we're not forgetting anything, so we plan like a week ahead of time, right? In our suitcases and our stuff, and it's all stacked up somewhere. And like, once I put something in the suitcase, I won't even go grab it out. Like if I need that shirt or whatever, I'm not going to grab anything out of that suitcase because I know it's in there. For him, he packing it right before the night before we walk out the door. And so you just don't think about that. You don't think about that, the hierarchy, the purpose, where do they fit in? The instinctiveness, the things that run through their mind that are different than they run through our mind. And when those worlds collide, as small as it may seem, the littlest stuff collide, it creates way bigger problems. It creates these bigger problems because we just don't think about they're programmed a certain way. They think a certain way. They do things a certain way. And it's instinctive and second nature. And when we don't learn to bring the two worlds together and find that common ground, you're going to always have battles that you don't need. You're going to always fight over things that you don't need to. I no longer give two damns when he packs his suitcase, as long as if we say we're leaving at 8, the shit's in the car at 8 o'clock and we're out the door. And I never grab his keys. And that's all that matters. It's all that matters. And as we go through this week, we're going to talk about more in detail how these worlds collide and how you find compromise on this common ground. What are you doing? How do we find compromise? See, we got to remember two things. One, we were never programmed, broken down, and reprogrammed. We were not broken down and reprogrammed. So this is a very intentional programming, and it's a very intentional thing that is done in the military world. It never happened to us. Even me being a medic, it never happened to us. There's things I do instinctively, but I was never broken down and reprogrammed a certain way. So we never had that happen to us. And most of us do not understand roles and the hierarchy in which they're defined. So when we do things like walk on eggshells, when we take away their ability to think, when we don't let them make decisions, even though we may not agree with them, we are really diminishing their comfort zone. So how do you find that? How do you find that common ground? And it's nothing we've done intentionally. It's nothing we've done intentionally. And a lot of us are with our veteran after service. So we didn't know them during service. I just happened to have an ex-husband who was active and one now who's the veteran. So the worlds do kind of overlap some, but not as much. So it's a big difference. And especially those of you who were with your veteran during active duty and then they retire or they get out, you have a whole, the set of problems you have are really hard for them to learn to adjust to the civilian life. Sure, they do some rebellious stuff because they're just not going to do it because, like typically they grow their hair and grow a beard because they couldn't have it in the military. They don't make their bed every day because they couldn't do that in the military world when they were living in barracks, those kind of things. But it's very different, and we need to understand that in order to move forward. Developing healthy, happier relationships is about compromise. That's what it's about. And sometimes we have to be the first ones who compromise so that compromise follows. It's got to become our set of normal in our life. And when we learn to live in that normal, guess what happens? They're comfortable in that normal, and compromise follows. And it's a time thing. I have so many spouses tell me, look, I've done it, like for 3 days, I've done it, and nothing's better. It's not going to get better in 3 days. It's not going to get better in a week. It's not going to happen. It's a consistent, constant doing and following through. And then all of a sudden you're going to wake up and you're going to say, look at where the hell we've come from. You don't see it overnight. You don't see it overnight. We're going to finish the rest of this series going into the week. But it's really important that we pay attention to this. It's really important that we think about this as we go forward into the rest of, to rebuild those relationships. That being said, I got a lot of little things to share. Don't forget that tomorrow night is boot camp. It's at 8 p.m. I will make sure everything is on there. You go to the website, click the link. You'll be right there. It's www.lovingmyveteran.com. Lots of good stuff that we're going to get to share and change. Tomorrow is Giving Tuesday. I know Stacy Manna has worked her tail off on that for y'all. And the Veteran Retreat. We have finalized everything, and that Veteran Retreat is going to be April the 18th through the 21st. It is a $25 deposit to guarantee your room space and your transportation here, and that's it. That's all you have to pay. It is inclusive of everything: meals, classes, fishing trips. Fishing licenses are a little different. We're working that out now. Boat trips, guided kayak tours, kids' activities, classes, seminars. All of that is at no charge to y'all. You can come and stay, have a great family retreat. You can email us at lovingmyveteran@gmail.com if you need more information, and we're actually going to put out registration forms as well. I know we've already got some people signed up, and space is limited. When it is full, it is full. So if you want a cabin versus a duplex versus a campsite, the sooner you sign up, the better. So drop me an email, and we will get that behind us and or handled, and because we're really looking forward to it, and time is running out quickly to get registered for that. So we have that going on as well. We'll have our coffee on Wednesday. So y'all, there's just lots going on. Watch for the little updates and stuff. And I'm gonna get off here. I'm Stacy. This has been Walking in My Shoes. We love it, and we're loving my veteran. I love mine today, every day, and always. Y'all have a blessed one. Bye.